The first scripture reading is from Jeremiah chapter 17, verses 5 through 10. Thus says the Lord, cursed are those who trust in mere mortals and make mere flesh their strength, whose hearts turn away from the Lord. They shall be like a shrub in the desert, and shall not see when relief comes. They shall live in the parched places of the wilderness, in an uninhabited salt land. Blessed are those who trust in the Lord, whose trust is the Lord. They shall be like a tree planted in water, sending out its roots by the stream. It shall not fear when heat comes, and its leaves shall stay green. In the year of drought it is not anxious, and it does not cease to bear fruit. The heart is devious above all else. It is perverse. Who can understand it? I, the Lord, test the mind and search the heart, to give all according to their ways, according to the fruit of their doings.
I'll be reading from Luke 6, verse 17 through 26. And it came down with them and stood in the plain, and the company of his disciples, and a great multitude of people out of all Judea and Jerusalem, and from the sea coast of Tyre and Sidon, which came to hear him, and to be healed of their diseases. And they that were vexed with unclean spirits, and they were healed. And the whole multitude sought to touch him, for there went virtue out of him, and healed them all. And he lifted up his eyes on his disciples, and said, Blessed be ye poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are ye that hunger now, for ye shall be filled. Blessed are ye that weep now, for ye shall laugh. Blessed are ye when men shall hate you, and when they shall separate you from their company, and shall reproach you, and cast you out your name as evil, for the Son of Man's sake. Rejoice ye that day, and leap for joy, for behold, your reward is great in heaven. For in the like manner did their fathers unto the prophets. But woe unto you that are rich, for ye have received your consolation. Woe unto you that are full, for ye shall hunger. Woe unto you that laugh now, for ye shall mourn and weep. Woe unto you when all men shall speak well of you, for you so did their fathers to the false prophets. May the Lord add a blessing to the reading of his word.
The idea to have a joint worship service came up around Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and we weren't able to plan it in time for that, and so we kicked it back to Black History Month. And that is why we have the service that we have today on February 17. I discussed with the worship committee what to say at this service, and I'm grateful to Jean Barker, the wife of the founding pastor of this congregation, who still had the report that the Reverend Bill Barker read from this very pulpit 54 years ago when he got back from Selma. He marched at Selma. He came home and typed up this report, and he read it from this pulpit on the fourth Sunday in Lent, March 28th, 1965. Some of the language in this report is not the kind of language we use today. Some of the words are downright offensive. I ran them all past Deacon Ray, and he said, just read it like it is. And so understanding that this was written 54 years ago, I would beg your indulgence, and we will read it just like it is, because those were dark days in the life of our nation. And let us hear this report, which was the sermon on that March 28th in 1965. Let us hear it thinking about the words that we just heard from the Gospel of Luke. We report on the work of the church when one of our church family goes to stand as the church on our behalf somewhere else. As some of you may recall, we have from time to time reports of members of our church family who have served in such diverse places as Puerto Rico, Alaska, the Appalachia area. This past week, our church stood and served in Selma and Montgomery, Alabama. In the person of this pastor, we, the church, were involved there. We would like to make it clear from the outset that we went not as adventurers, but as the church of Jesus Christ. Why did you go to Selma? Is the most commonly asked question. The only answer is that we as the church have a responsibility to God, the God who stands with any who are oppressed. We have a responsibility to society as a whole, wherever there are injustices. The responsibility to society over which the risen, living Jesus Christ continues to reign. We stand wherever there is an injustice or oppression. I had read of all of these, as I am sure most of you had. Last week I had the privilege of experiencing them in a way which made an indelible mark upon me. Anyone choosing to identify with the Negro community in the South, we were told at orientation, the Friday we arrived in Selma, is branded automatically as a white nigger. I am a white nigger. People often tell me that you do not understand the South having never lived there. This is, of course, true. However, these folks have so frequently said this, these folks who have so frequently said this, have spoken about one of two Souths, and there are two. There is the white man's South, and there is the Negro South. The experience I had this past week I shall never forget. I must be very honest to say that I will never be the same again. Anyone who identifies with that community begins to understand something of the oppression, the brutality, the grievances, the indignities, the injustices long suffered by members of the Negro race in this country of ours. The extraordinary thing that struck me as I was there was the caliber of the leadership. These leaders realized that the only way to ever have any kind of improvement in conditions there is by the process established within our own democratic republic, specifically to change laws on the local, state, and national levels. These leaders are committed to democracy. As we all know, the only way to change laws is by electing responsible public officials. And obviously, in a democracy, the only way that anybody can see to do that is by going to the polls. However, only registered voters may go to the polls. And through the years, the attempt by Negroes in the South to register to vote has been frustrated. There have been ingenious and systematic attempts, still continuing, to deprive them of their franchise. Through the years, there have been such practices in Selma, in spite of the series of bills that have been introduced and passed by our Congress in 1957. Attempts which continue to deprive large number of Negroes to register. This is true throughout the heart of the so-called Black Belt in the South. For example, in Selma itself, there are 2 days a month on which a Negro person may register. When a Negro attempts to register to vote on one of these 2 days, more likely than not, he is told that the registrar is out to lunch, or is too busy, and to come back again. There is also, of course, the literacy test that one must pass in order to register to vote. The questions used in Selma for the literacy test are along these lines. Here are some of the questions asked of any Negro attempting to register. Who has the power to make laws applying to areas of federal arsenals, and who must consent to such laws? What happens if the House of Representatives fails to act when the duties of choosing a president of the United States devolve upon it? Or, which of the original 13 states had the most representatives in the first Congress, or what limitation in size does the Constitution put upon the District of Columbia? I know very few professors of history or political science who would be able to answer such questions as these adequately. At best, only 2 or 3 Negroes per month have been registered through the past years. By 1963, and this was 1965, out of 32,000 Negroes in Dallas County, of which Selma is the county seat, fewer than 200 were registered to vote. A close friend of mine now is a man by the name of Reverend Claude Brown. He is a Presbyterian minister. He is a Negro. He has been in Selma for 23 years. Sometime I would like to tell you about the outstanding work Claude Brown has done in Selma. Again, responsibly, he has tried everything to register Negroes to vote. 2 years ago, he went to the probate judge, warning him of the frustration and the anger in the Negro community over the inability to register. The probate judge simply pooh-poohed him. Sure enough, the Dallas County Voters League and the Selma Negro Ministerial Association finally this January asked the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to help them secure voter registration among those members of the Negro community. Even now, there are still only 335 registered black voters in Dallas County. Without boring you with a lot of statistics, and I could give many, in such surrounding counties in Alabama as, for example, Lowndes County, where the lady was shot this past week, there were until a week ago no registered voters among 5,122 potential voters in Lowndes County. And today there is only one registered Negro voter. The segregationist white power structure has been willing and anxious to employ any means of terrorism to deprive the Negro community of its right to register to vote. I know this report may seem to you like a rambling, rather poorly organized type of message, but I would like to briefly make mention of the thing that impressed me much of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. This is Dr. Martin Luther King's group. First of all, it is the absolute and total commitment to non-violence. I had read of this before, I had been there, I'd heard of it, but until I saw it with my own eyes, and had the experience of sitting through not 1, not 2, but 3 brainwashing sessions, I guess you would call them, in this matter of nonviolence, I really did not understand. But they were completely in earnest, the leaders of the community in the South, about truly living up to the Sermon on the Mount. It was an inspiration to see all of this. This means that they are committed to never resort to force. They will never physically attack anyone. They refuse to retaliate by striking back. They will not carry weapons. In fact, with these, it goes even so far to refuse to raise an arm or a hand in self-defense. I'm sure you appreciate that this is grounded completely in the New Testament. The reasons are Christian, once again, far more deeply than any member of the white power structure of Alabama and elsewhere. The Negro leadership realizes the depths of the fears and the frustrations and the guilt in the white community and realizes that only the power of love will be a healing force necessary. In addition to the principle of nonviolence, I was impressed by the law-abiding quality of these leaders. These were men of a degree of responsibility that impressed me so greatly that I can hardly truly put it into words. Men and women who are determined to work within the framework of the United States Constitution, who observe and respect our heritage of law and order. I could comment on the type of leadership being exercised by the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Dr. King and others. They put us through a very strenuous series of orientation sessions to make as many provisions for our safety as they possibly could. They pointed out that we were really now responsible for the rest of the group, and we were not to go off on impromptu demonstrations of our own. We were there to work together with them and carefully plan well-led demonstrations, which would, of course, be the March to Montgomery itself, the only one in which the Pittsburgh group participated. It is now an accepted fact, and this is perhaps difficult for many to understand, but understand it we must. It is now an accepted fact that without such nonviolent, peaceable demonstrations, by the Negroes themselves and others who are sympathetic with them, who mean to stand with them as the church has done. Without these nonviolent demonstrations, there can be no change. Without these, nothing can happen. It is now agreed that the message by our President, the President of our United States, the bill now being prepared, and we won't discuss the merits or demerits of that, it is not our place for business here. But without such demonstrations, there would be no redress of grievances that the Negro community knows, especially in such areas as Dallas County and elsewhere. It was put very succinctly, I think, by a middle-aged man who was in my section of the march the first Sunday afternoon a week ago today. He was tired. He was a school teacher himself in Selma. He knew very well that he might lose his job for marching. He had papers to grade for the next day. Nobody particularly enjoyed plodding along the 8-mile hike under a blazing Alabama sun on a highway. But he said to me, "I wish we didn't have to do this, but it's the only way we can get our point across." I could go on and talk about the meaning itself of the Montgomery March, the awesome solemnity a week ago today, as we crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge, the discipline, the dedication, the determination of the Negro marchers, the woman whom I found after 7 miles in great pain marching because she had to march, even though she had suffered 2 broken ribs 2 weeks earlier when the state police attacked and mercilessly clubbed her, breaking 2 ribs. I could talk about the contrast between some of the white supremacists rushing by in cars with such emblems on the side as "We hate niggers, keep Alabama white." The small children who are being egged on to scream obscenities at the marchers. The discipline, the dignity of the marchers themselves. The contrast. I could talk about the cross-section of Americans in that march. The members of the white Southern community who joined us in that march, and churchmen from all denominations. Monday and Tuesday, of course, only 300 were allowed to march in the march. At first I was disappointed because I was not allowed to march as one of the 300. Very frankly, I would be quite ashamed, however, to have taken the place of any member of the Negro community in Dallas County who wanted to make that march, although many of them were literally walking barefooted. This was somewhat the equivalent of winning the Congregational Medal of Honor. It was such a distinct privilege for these 300 to be selected, and I would not have wanted to deprive anyone from making the march because of my being there at that time. Instead, I served on the food detail, along with many Pittsburgh clergymen. We took breakfast, lunch, and dinner out to the marches those 2 days, getting up usually around 3:30 a.m., driving out so we would be there in time to have the marchers fed and on the road by 7. This was perhaps the real moment of truth for those of us from Pittsburgh. 6 times a day we made that trip, out across 80 to that desolate swamp country of Lowndes County, where the woman, as you know, was shot this past week. We were quite conscious of the words that the man in orientation had told us the first day: "You are already dead men." And in a sense, we knew that we were, as I'm sure the woman who was shot also knew. Wednesday, we rejoined the march again and again, and served in the capacity of marshals. And this is my favorite part, if I can comment. We're coming to the end of this. It's about the length of the sermon. But my favorite part comes now. Bill Barker says this: "There comes a time when, as the Christian community, we must do more than sit. There come times in the Christian community when we must do more than give of our money. There come times in the Christian community when we must do more than get on our knees and pray. There come times in the Christian community when we must do more than write letters or send messages. There at some time or another comes a moment when the church must be engaged to send its own people to stand bodily and physically with the oppressed. The church did that this past week In response to the appeals and the pleas of the people of Selma, the Church of Jesus Christ was present, not because we had answers, we did not. Not because we are better, we are not. Not because we are opposed to George Wallace, whom I Googled. He was the governor of Alabama, who was aiming for the presidency, the White House at the time. We are not. But simply because we are committed to Jesus Christ. Not to have gone to Selma, at least in my humble opinion, would have been to fail God himself. Not to have gone to Selma, in my humble opinion, would have been to fail the society over which God still rules. This afternoon, there will be an opportunity for anyone from this community or anywhere to question and further discuss the involvement of this church in the Selma movement with ministers and representatives of session. The Reverend Bill Barker. Did you notice, in the reading we had from the Gospel of Luke, it was vaguely familiar because it sounded like the Beatitudes in Matthew. But the Beatitudes in Matthew are all sweetness and light. The Beatitudes in Luke come with a blessing and a woe. The Beatitudes in Luke say, "Blessed are you who are empty now, for you will be filled. Blessed are you who are hungry now, you will be filled. Blessed are you who weep now, you will laugh." And then it turns around and says, "Woe to you who are filled now, for you will be empty. Woe to you who laugh now, for you will weep." In other words, the day will come that no matter what your circumstance is, no matter what, whether it's good or bad, you will find the shoe on the other foot. I honestly had a dream once that I went to heaven and found that I had to become all the people in my own story. The people I had done wrong, and the people I had done right. Someday the shoe is on the other foot. Someday we are called to stand with the oppressed in our day, in our time, in our place. In light of these words from Selma, what are we doing with our lives? What are we doing with our lives and with our callings to be followers of Jesus Christ? How shall we live now? Amen. Let us pray for the world and for the church, saying, "Blessed are those who hope in God, whose trust is in the Lord." Holy One, you created us with the ability to choose between life and death, between curses and blessings. Help us to reject the advice of the wicked, of those who put self-interest above the greater good of your world. And by your grace, empower us to put our trust in you. Blessed are those who hope in God, whose trust is in the Lord. We pray for those who put their trust in themselves instead of you, who must look to their own meager resources and try to find within themselves all that they need for life in this world. Blessed are those who hope in God, whose trust is in the Lord. We pray for those who put their trust in princes and politicians and powerful men and armies and find themselves forever deceived and misled. Blessed are those who hope in God, whose trust is in the Lord. We pray for those who are poor now, who are hungry now, who weep now. Blessed are those who hope in God, whose trust is in the Lord. We pray for those who are making poor choices in their lives, that they might turn to you and toward wise leaders for guidance. Blessed are those who hope in God, whose trust is in the Lord. We pray for trees, and for rivers and streams, and for all your good creation. Turn us from our exploitative ways to help you renew the earth. Blessed are those who hope in God, whose trust is in the Lord. We pray for those many who weigh upon our hearts. This day we pray for both of our congregations, for First Baptist Church and for Bower Hill Church. Bless our relationship, bless our futures, bless our ministries in this place. We pray for Denny Geis, for Barb Hughes on the loss of her brother, for Betty Ewing, for Davis Gray, for Lauren Coker, Betty Mancini, Virginia Mason, Gwen Patterson, Virginia Reinstetter, Cal Wilson. And in the moment of silence now, we name before you those many who weigh upon our hearts whom we have not named. And we ask you to hear us, even as together we say the prayer that Jesus taught us, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Let us continue our worship with the giving of our gifts.